Hello everyone, good evening, and a very warm welcome to all of you. I'm Revati, an intern at Therapy, and today we are gathered here to have an interactive Q&A session with our esteemed guest Dr. Tirthankar Guha Thakurta on the topic of allyship. Before we begin, I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Therapy to our viewers. Therapy is an online mental health platform that provides ethical, competent, and reliable mental health care for our clients. We at Therapy try to create a safe and an inclusive space for the people across the globe. Our mission is to become a trusted channel of support and compassionate care for clients in their road to recovery and growth. Therapy provides a range of services including psychotherapy, psychiatric consultations, assessments, support groups, supervision, and corporate services. Additionally, we also have a training academy named Flourish, which is aimed at bringing credible opportunities for the professional development of established and budding mental health practitioners. In provision of all the services, we adhere to our core values of ethics, reliability, competence, integrity, and inclusivity. Moving on, I would like to introduce Dr. Ananya Sinha, who is the founder, director, and chief clinical psychologist at Therapy. Dr. Ananya is present with us today along with Padmaja Mushahari, who is a consultant clinical psychologist at Therapy. Our guest for today is Dr. Tirthankar Guha Thakurta. He is an assistant professor in the Department of Physiology of the KPC Medical College and Hospital in Kolkata, West Bengal. He has been working for the rights of the queer community for more than 15 years, which also made him an integral part of the petitioning during the course of legal hearing on Section 377 at Delhi High Court. Dr. Tirthankar also takes interest in queer pedagogy and creating an inclusive medical campus. Apart from this, he also creates short films and documentaries for increasing awareness about the same. These short films and documentaries have also been screened at different national and international film festivals. A very warm welcome, sir.
Thank
I
you,
welcome.
Revit. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I also welcome all our viewers joining us for today's discussion. Please note that you can always add your questions in the comment section on YouTube, and we will be delighted to take them up with our guests. Now, coming to the topic of today's discussion, I would like to hand over to Dr. Ananya.
Thank you, Revati, for this very warm welcome. And I warmly welcome Dr. Tirthankar Guha Thakurta and Padmaja and Revati to the discussion. It is an honor for us to have Dr. Tirthankar with us. I have seen him, I think I know him almost for 2 decades now, and have always known him as a passionate teacher, a passionate doctor, and somebody who had been relentlessly working for cure rights for more than 2 decades, I guess. So it's an honor to have you with us, Dr. Tirthankar.
Thank you.
And also today we are gathered here to talk about something which is probably very relevant, but the reason why we chose this topic is to also understand the different layers of the term and the concept of allyship. So, in this Pride Month, we thought that might be a very good area to explore. And I welcome everyone in the audience to raise questions, doubts, and even perspectives, share perspectives with us, and we'll be happy to take them. So, starting with this, Dr. Tirthankar, like the concept of allyship, the term allyship also is something that we have seen trending recently. That's almost like the Gen Z would call it's a trend now. And however, we would probably like to start off by asking, what is allyship? What do you understand by allyship?
Ananya, this is a very tricky question because it's like defining friendship. Now, people might have their own perspectives as to what allyship mean to them. But from a socio-political context, a context of working with queer rights issues, I feel allyship is someone you can trust that they will always stand up for you. And now, this standing up as a process has no bounds, but also is limited by their own social locations. So, for example, a small child in the family can be an ally in
Hmm.
their own capacity. A teacher
Hmm.
can be an ally in their own capacity. So it's not like there is a bulleted list of points that a person has to satisfy in order to become an ally. Because
Hmm.
allyship, like friendship, can also manifest with different powers and responsibilities. But what is very intrinsic in allyship is an unhindered support and an ability. This part is very complex. An ability to support the individual, but also dissociate the rights movement from the individual and support that individually. What I mean by saying this is, suppose I consider myself to be an ally of Dr. Ananya. Now,
Hmm.
if one day I have a fight with Dr. Ananya, I may decide at a personal ground to stop talking for 3 days, but I'll not stop supporting the queer rights for 3 days. So at one point, it's personal because I support you personally, but it's also political, which is dissociated from the personal. This part has to be understood.
That's beautifully put. I think that sort of sets the tone of today's discussion, that how we have to dissociate personal from the professional, that understand what exactly we are standing up for.
Okay.
And that brings me to the next question. And you can probably tell us a little bit about the historical significance of what was the need of this allyship. Why do we need an ally for the LGBTQI community?
If you look at the history of the queer rights movement itself, the history has been more political than sexual or social. I mean, uh, pride has always been political. If I go through the even the very conventional history in which the Westerners would put the queer history in front of us, uh, the Stonewall riots that took place way back in the uh, late 1960s and paved the way for the first Pride walk in 1970s or 1969, if you might say. That was the first political benchmark of queer visibility. But now, if we come to this question, was there no visibility before that? I mean, outright in one night, people did not become queer affirmative. So, what happened was, allyship is a process where you gradually gain trust. It starts with the person, but then it extends over the issue. Now, this part is very crucial because people who are the leaders or forerunners of a movement sometimes have to portray their personal life in a very politically correct manner in order to gain support. This makes their life a bit difficult also. So, if you talk from the Indian context, if I talk about allyship, in India, a very visible talk about the queer rights movement started, say, I would say, early back in 1970s and 1980s. And that was almost at the level of a hush hush, which gradually started becoming louder and more prominent by the 1990s. Now, in the late 1990s, the first Pride Walk was organized in Kolkata. Kolkata happens to be the first city in the entire Asia where first Pride Walk was held from Park Circus.
Okay.
Now, that time it was called the Friendship Walk. And
Oh.
uh, the allyship and the movement at that point of time was very, I should say, difficult. I mean, I've seen those days where this was a day when you did not have access to mobile phones. So you'd be speaking to each other over landlines, and the landlines will be common lines in a house. So activists who are probably also not very out in the family will be receiving their calls from these common lines, speaking with coded words to be decoded by them, organize. And of course, here you understand you need some allies at home who will receive the call, keep the privacy, also extend support. So, for example, uh, uh, a young man who is gay, not yet out, in an era where 377 is still reigning and people are fearing persecution in the hands of the law and the police. Police harassment is happening regularly, and they are trying to organize maybe a magazine that speaks about queer rights secretly, and then a phone call comes. So that person also needs maybe a brother, a cousin, a sister, or an uncle or an aunt who will secretly take that call given that particular timing and will convey the message that this message was conveyed. So this is just one example of how allyship has always been linked to the growth of the movement. Without allies, a movement, I mean, you can compare this with the Swadeshi movement. So, like the way the support happened from the family, these are undocumented, uncharted histories, which I think should be documented at some point of time. I mean, the
Yeah.
movement did not only happen with people walking on the streets. There were people in the kitchen, people in the library, people secretly working under the table. They all helped the movement grow. So, this is what allyship is about.
Right. That is so beautifully said that, the movement, like when we think of a movement, we only think of people out in the open who are fighting for it, but so many silent supporters and allies who are making this possible. And that sort of makes us understand the importance of allyship in this context. Is there a difference between being an ally versus being an affirmative? Like we are often you hearing this term that's pure affirmative therapist or queer affirmative person, queer affirmative organization. Is there a difference between these two
I
contexts?
think there is a difference, and the difference is a prominent one.
Mm-hmm.
Affirmative talks about your professional attributes and the services that you provide. Now, it's
Mm-hmm.
almost like that I keep on saying to my students as well, in order to teach science, you may not always be scientifically oriented. So, for example, I may believe in superstitions at home, but I may be a professor of physics. So it doesn't also mean that I teach physics in a bad way. Maybe I'm very good at explaining physics, but personally I have my own prejudices and biases, and I live with that. Similarly, you may have a queer affirmative psychologist who, during the therapy session, do not discriminate uh, on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity, also gives state of the art therapy, but maybe they also have some sort of inhibition in their mind, or they don't feel comfortable or obliged, to come out and proud and speak for the queer rights. So that is where they dissociate the professional front from their personal front, which I believe is absolutely okay. Not everyone may be an ally. And ally, of course, is always affirmative. So being ally also means that you are both affirmative, and also you are an active or passive spokesperson for the rights of the person. So, in an ideal situation, a queer affirmative therapist is also an ally, but that is uh, the very ideal that we can get.
Right. On that note, I think because in therapy, we I think we interact with therapists also, and this is something, there has been a shift in the way we are addressing some queer issues in therapy. There was a point of time long back, around 20 years back, when aversive conditioning was a practice, and was a practice when we wanted to quote unquote change the orientation, and that was being practiced. And then thankfully there had been a shift, and there had been stances taken by organizations like APA, the American Psychological Association, where they have clearly mentioned that there was a point of time this was a disorder. Homosexuality was seen as a disorder, and then it was changed. The stances were changed, and it is no longer a disorder. So, as therapists, also, I think people have gone through a journey of shifting their way of addressing it in therapy as well. And I'm also wondering, like, it might be sometimes challenging, like your personal values are shifting based on the socio-cultural context. Then your professional values are shifting based on the professional stances that your professional authorities are taking. And how does it play out in therapy, and whether it clashes at times, where easy or difficult it is to go through so many changes in the notion of what am I to be or how am I to be as a professional, as a personal.
I think it is absolutely very challenging because, unlearning is a very difficult process, because when we learn something, we keep on developing on that idea. So, all the future schema that I will develop in my life will be in some way probably connected to my core learning processes. And so, if one of those aspects change suddenly, the entire learning system collapses. And we are always afraid of that. So that is one very big challenge that unlearning gives us. Another thing is, in India in particular, we see that learning is a slow process, in the sense that therapists and medical professionals, unless they are themselves motivated, there is no binding that they have to always get updated. So, for example, there is no annual certification examination. Uh, to prove whether you are already updated with the recent updates. Now, because of this, because the learning is always self-directed, and assuming that many of us will not be good self-directed learners out of the busy schedules, so maybe what you are seeing today from an experienced professional is a result of their active learning 15 years back, because it took 15 years for that person to be an established therapist. And that is why the changes that you are trying to invoke today will probably become more visible and manifested 10 or 15 years later. So, unless we make the learning process very immediate and active, this lagging will be there. That is one big problem. Coming to your other question, where you said whether my personal belief systems will be in conflict with my professional and vice versa, and how that affects us. Uh, I think it does. I mean, even though maybe I'm following all the technicalities and formalities that are laid down by standard organizations and associations and trying to be a queer affirmative therapist despite not being an ally, the problem is sometimes my own core beliefs and prejudices will come out, and maybe in the form of a Freudian slip, but that can cause a devastating damage sometime. And that I have seen in many people. I mean, many individuals will be totally supporting the queer rights, saying that I consider it to be as good as normal. So you understand what I say. When you say as good as normal, you know that normality is defined outside queerness. So this
Yeah.
kind of errors we tend to make if we really don't believe in this.
Right.
Sometimes people might think that learning such rigorous terminologies, gender pronouns, etc., is more an academic thing rather than a practical thing. But I personally think that vocabularies have a large impact on our thinking process. If we have a specific word for a specific concept, we can clearly understand the existence of the concept. Unless create terminologies that are affirmative and learn to use the terminologies, maybe mentally we will not be prepared to implement that in the real life also. So it
Right.
does take effort. It does take
Right,
effort.
right. So thank you for sharing that perspective. Even as practitioners, we try to engage in a lot of reflective practice and we try to understand how our personal values are impacting the overall well-being of the client. So what we usually try to do is we or I won't say what we usually, this is our main, what we always do is we try to keep the client's well-being, benefit of the client, and the concept of beneficence and non-maleficence always are the top, that we should do no harm or always do something which is beneficial for the client. And we also try to go back and see how this conflict, or if there is any, or our personal values or anything else is coming out in therapy in a form that it is being harmful to the client. Having said that, it is not an easy process for many. We actually are also having another discussion with Maitri Ralte, who's also a clinical psychologist, and we will be having this month only with practitioners, because we want, I think these are also voices that need to be heard, the challenges that we go through. And this is not just limited to therapists. I think as therapists, I'm speaking for the therapists, but I think this kind of conflict is something, maybe there can be other, like I might be a part of an professional organization which has a value which I'm probably an ally, the organization may not be aligned with that. So how does that play out? I have to be someone else when I'm working, whereas I am somebody else. So these are probably the complexities that we need to more and more talk about, and probably then only we will be able to decode and see how we can respond to them better.
True.
Uh, when you brought up this concept of gendered pronoun, I think sometime back, me and Padmaja were having a chat, and we were just talking about this. That it's sometimes, and we have seen in not only our clients, we have seen amongst us also. Sometimes when we are having conversations, we have seen in others that people really are, they're really trying very hard to use the right pronoun and to do the right things, but yet we sometimes we don't know whether we are using the right pronoun or not. It is not just about the pronoun. I remember I was seeing a father and a son, and the son wanted to be called by the pronoun she/they, and the father was really trying very hard, and then also he was faltering, and he was saying that, I'm so sorry, I'm trying, but, and his trials were sometimes seen like, it as if he was not being inclusive, like that of course an adolescent child was interpreting it as like, okay, you are not understanding, you're not being inclusive. So my point here is that how do we make these easy when there is a particular grammatical way of learning? Of course, we have learned something, and it's like you very rightly said, it's very difficult to unlearn and relearn. And the practice part, of course, the practice comes more with awareness. But do you think there are other ways, like introducing these concepts very early in school? And having certain things, like whenever you're filling a form, whenever you're doing, like these are like just the part or way of greeting someone, making it almost like a standard that you ask the person what kind of pronoun the person will prefer to be used. Do you think these kind of practices will make these things better or easier
Yes,
to?
absolutely. Absolutely. Because what we learn in the early parts of our life are hardwired in our brain. And
Hmm.
it tends to regulate what we learn in the later part. And
Hmm.
that is true for any learning process. Now, coming to that, the problem that we usually face regarding appropriate pronoun use, you will see that will particularly crop up in languages like English and Hindi, where
Hmm.
either the pronouns or in some other cases the verbs are gendered. It will
Hmm.
not be very prominent in Bengali and related languages where the verbs and the pronouns are non gendered.
Hmm.
So it's not again about the language. I mean, what I'm trying to say is throughout ages, people
Hmm.
have learned language in a very binary sexual manner. The language itself has been designed in such a manner that there is
Hmm.
nothing other than the he and the she. And if at all there is something, it is always a it, which is always
Hmm.
maybe of a lower profile or lower rank than he
Hmm.
and she. So
Hmm.
that is how language practices have been around the world.
Hmm.
And given that we have learned those languages in those forms, it's very
Hmm.
difficult sometimes to reflexly utter, say,
Hmm.
they in a singular form.
Hmm. Hmm.
So there is a grammatical contradiction happening in our brain. In such situation, of course, practicing an early introduction will help. Also, as queer allies ourselves, we have to understand it is the effort and intention of the person that matters more than the outcome. Because sometimes we become too much worked up. I mean, people who are actually trying to change also need support. You
Hmm.
cannot fight with someone and then ask that person to be an ally. That
Hmm.
makes no sense. So you also have to help the person become an ally. You
Absolutely.
understand that the person is actively trying but
Hmm.
faltering because of some issues. So
Hmm.
acknowledge that. I have seen many people who genuinely support queer issues, issues of neurodevelopmental issues in children, but they
Hmm.
don't know the right terminology, sometimes use words that we consider politically incorrect. But if
Hmm.
you look at their real intention, the intention is really good and they're
Hmm.
open to learning. So I think a more decent way is to tell them in private that I understand that you are supporting, but the word that you used might hurt someone. This is a better terminology for that. So I
Okay.
once met a person who was out and out supporting queer rights. He did
Hmm.
not know that the word, the homo, is a derogatory form of the word homosexual.
Hmm.
Apparently it sounded that that person was speaking in a very bad intonation, but if you really hear what they were speaking, was absolutely nice. So
Hmm.
once I pointed this out privately without embarrassing the person, they made an
Hmm.
active effort and changed the word. They started
Hmm.
using the word queer or gay or
Hmm.
lesbian in place of the half word homo. So I think we
Hmm.
should also be active teachers, and
Hmm.
we should also be their ally in the process of.
Hmm. 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 Absolutely. So it's almost like it's both ways. It's a both way process of supporting each other. Then only we can probably reach the point where we want to reach. Again, like since allyship, like now we are going to the details of allyship, and I can already see that many concepts and aspects are coming up. Are there any stages of allyship?
Yeah, theoretically there are. I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
first immediate step of allyship would be recognizing that there are certain things that are different from what I know, what I am, or what I see. So
Hmm.
that very first recognition of the existence of something is very important. The
Hmm.
second important stage is it usually overlaps with the personal and the political at the same time, is to try to understand the nature of this identity, the politics of the identity, and the what's and how's of the identity.
Hmm.
And Third step is very important. It's a step where you actively learn and listen. We as
Hmm.
allies often have a tendency to silence queer voices also. We It's a human tendency to compare experiences with our own lived experiences. But
Hmm.
it's also important to understand that someone's experience may not be a replica of my own experience. So when
Hmm.
someone starts talking about when a say a cis gay man starts
Hmm.
talking about say psychological issues or abuses faced from a male partner, it's
Hmm.
not necessary that a cis het female will immediately relate that. Yes, I think that relation is usually done in good sense. It's
Hmm.
also a way of showing allyship. But doing
Hmm.
that repeatedly and silencing the other voice
Hmm.
also lumps down the other issues that may not happen in a cis het relationship domain.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it's also very important to learn, actively engage, and be very
Hmm.
silent observer. And
Hmm.
third, and very importantly, it's important to uh, actively read and participate in events where you learn about the issue. I have seen many people who emotionally support a movement but do
Hmm.
not have maybe a very sound knowledge of the politics of the movement.
Hmm.
How this actually becomes problematic is when they are challenged by the mainstream
Hmm.
society, they cannot give a satisfactory answer as to why they
Hmm.
are supporting a particular movement. And the whole
Hmm.
thing becomes more, again, reduced down to a very personal front. Like, because you
Hmm.
support that person, you are supporting this. You don't even know why you are supporting this. So,
Hmm.
these are, I think, very important steps of listening, of learning, and then
Hmm.
finally, in order to be vocal in their own capacity as much as
Hmm.
possible.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that that voice has to be generated. The person must learn that uh, despite maybe not being a queer identified person, the person can become a spokesperson for queer rights, can speak out loudly whenever any derogatory remarks are made about the queer issues, and can also actively promote queer issues. So if that leadership comes spontaneously, then that person
Hmm.
is a good guy.
Right. Right. That actually reminded me of, around 16, 17 years back when I was doing my research um, on with transgender and transsexual individuals. When I approached a few organizations, I remember in one particular organization, I was told that we will allow you to take our interviews and everything, but we have one condition: you'll have to spend one day with us, an entire day. You have to listen to our stories, go to the places where we are going, do everything with us. That is the only condition. And I think that one day really changed my entire perspective. What I did not learn from my 6 or 7 months long research, I learned on that particular day. So when you said that, actively learn and listen, I think that listening part was so important. And next is, I think since we're talking about, how you can be an ally, so are there any ways or steps, or what are the different ways by which you can be, again, due to lack of better words, I'm using the term a good or an effective ally?
uh, I think the first step to become an effective ally is to get in touch with people you want to extend your allyship to. That is very
Hmm.
important. I mean, it is very paradoxical to be a queer ally and you don't have a
Hmm.
queer friend. So, because otherwise the lived experiences don't come to you firsthand. So, there is no point in being just a theoretical ally, although that even counts in today's time. But it's important to engage in social areas where there is an interface where you can get in touch with people who are queer identified in their own
Hmm.
capacities.
Hmm.
And second is, as I told you, another very important way to engage with this is to participate in their events. So
Hmm.
maybe you hear that maybe you are interested in films and you hear that a
Hmm.
queer film festival is going on. So it's
Hmm.
a good idea to go there, not only to
Hmm.
watch the films, or to also to
Hmm.
see the perspectives that people are
Hmm.
bringing around and what
Hmm.
the current queer community is thinking about that film. Are they liking
Hmm.
it? Are they
Hmm.
disliking it? Are they
Hmm.
approving of the approach that has been portrayed
Hmm.
on the
Hmm.
screen? So, if you like books, go to a queer book reading session. See
Hmm.
the content of the book. Also,
Hmm.
see how people in the audience are reacting to it. So, that
Hmm.
way, gradually, you become aligned to the socio political nuances of people
Hmm.
you are actually interested to extend an allyship to.
Hmm.
Because ultimately, as we say for any rights movement, you always extend the support, but you don't tell them what to do. It is they who
Yeah.
decide their political path. That's true for any rights movement. I
Hmm.
cannot join a women rights movement and tell the biological females or identified females what to do, being maybe a cis gay man myself. That is not done. So
Hmm.
this is very important that you look into their perspectives, see through their lenses as much as possible, and then of course it will get colored by your own lenses, and you will have your own understanding of the rights.
Right. So thank you. I think Padmaja, you can probably take over from here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tirthankar. That has shed a lot of light into allyship and what we call as allies, right? What the difficulty that I had when I was working with LGBTQIA basically on this is that there are a lot of theories out there. What is allyship, what is LGBTQIA, what are the terms there, but when it actually came to practice, that we always see that there is a gap. We know the terms, we know, okay, these are the pronouns, but how much are we actually doing to maybe promote allyship, or being like we were discussing about the allyship, the whole unlearning itself, right? Because there have been so many years of conditioning into this whole heteronormative worldview that for us, for me personally, and for as a practitioner also, it's we always fall into this loophole of going into that binary lens. So certain experiences that Ananya ma'am has shared. For me also, there are certain experiences that I have experienced as a school counselor as well, right? Say in all the systems that are there, say whether it's the medical or the corporate or even in schools, we have seen that there has been changes now. Now people are more, forthcoming. Now they talk about LGBTQIA community, and they would also ask me to come and speak to students. But there are certain things in terms of like certain things that I felt a little stifled with, because I didn't know it was it within my capacity in how or in which ways to help them. There were experiences of bullying because student identified with say belonging to a particular belonging to a community, right? So this were certain aspects that I didn't know how to address and how to go about, and in terms of then the whole status of allyship, where do you think is India in terms of that, and what are the challenges that maybe specific challenges like socio-political, legal, or whether it's in terms of the medical health sector or student in education sector. What would you say would be the challenges that that may come in terms of allyship? What would be your views on that, sir?
A big challenge is definitely there is something that we often call uh, contact bias. So uh, traditionally, the kind of education that we receive gives us some idea about what queer lives are about. And now, because most of our teachings are a bit eccentricized towards cis heteronormative way of thinking, we often try learn that the queer way of life, if at all it exists, is something that is out of the ordinary and maybe out of the normal. To grow out of that itself is a challenge. As Ananya was also discussing, the whole unlearning process becomes the first barrier to communication, because it prevents effective communication, because you already know or think that you know a lot, but what you know is inaccurate. So that is one very big challenge. Second are definitely the administrative issues. So I'll just give you a very simple example, as Dr. Ananya was also saying. Say, for example, you go to a college or university and fill up a form. And if that form has only options like male and female, maybe it will not affect 99% of the applicants. But what it does to the 99% of the applicants is to imply that there is no other gender other than male and female recognized within the campus. So maybe I'm just saying, uh, even if options for other gender diverse individuals would have been there, we are not sure whether a person who is genderqueer or is transgender would have opted for that subject in that specific university. Maybe that seat would have gone vacant. So it's also not just about the opportunity. Of course, that factor is always there. Apart from that, also, at least people who are cis het individuals will have an idea that we are entering a campus that is inclusive. Here, the identity is recognized, and therefore they will think twice before making a transphobic joke or a homophobic joke. So again, whenever we normalize singular cis het domain, I mean, what we call the normative approach to cis heterosexuality, the problem is it also empowers people who would passively bully the queer individuals through casual conversation and jokes. So, administration plays a very important role in shaping how people in a campus will behave or people in the office will behave. So, for example, you will think twice before making a homophobic or transphobic comment in an office where on entering you see at one corner maybe in a very subtle manner a pride flag is there. So I think these small gestures matter. So yeah, I think these are very important issues which people feel are difficulty levels to overcome in order to become an ally. And then comes the personal level problems, the problem from the friend circles, the problem from the family, that is always there, starting with questions like why are you supporting them, are you also gay? So these are also the kind of bullies that allies do face. And uh, the answer may be very difficult in this situation because they can always say that they are not queer, but also it empowers the people who are asking the question by telling them that because I am not gay, okay, therefore my answer has been accepted to be normal and I can enter your friend circle. So what if I was also queer? So these questions themselves are very politically problematic questions, and you need a very strong voice, a very strong support system in the ally group itself also to support each other to become allies. That is very important. For example, in my friend circle, a person whose sexual orientation I may not know, or even if I know, I may not disclose, is opening up as an ally, a queer ally, and is also getting scorned with maybe apparently friendly, humorous questions like, why are you an ally? We need people from the ally also who will raise their hand and say, this is not the right kind of question. So they also need the support, I think.
I think that's a very important point, sir, that you brought up about being in the circle, right? And we have at times encountered, say, individuals, friends, like you said, who would say that why are you supporting them, or say even as individuals, say. There have been names being called, or if we watch movies together, certain derogatory terms that would be used, whether it's a friend or a family member. So, if you had maybe any suggestions or any kind of recommendations for say individuals who have who want to engage with family members, friends or colleagues who may hold certain kind of conservative beliefs on LGBTQI issues, what would you recommend or what would you suggest could be done?
Every friend circle or family have their own dynamics, so it has to be optimized. And I will always say, go with your gut feelings. That is the easiest way to say, because I, at sitting at this distance, might give maybe three theoretical suggestion, but the person who is facing these questions and the issues is the person who have seen them maybe for 10 years, so they know their mannerisms, they know their apprehended questions better than I do. So it's always good to go with the gut feelings. Second, I can give you some suggestions as to how things usually work out, may not work out always. I have always seen that uh, educating and exposing people to a topic before throwing them into a pool of challenging situation and question always helps. Basically, preparedness helps. So maybe for a gay person who wants to come out to the family, apart from many other things that you always encourage, like being financially independent, academically qualified, apart from that, the person also needs to introduce issues and words related to queer terminologies to the family first. It should not be like you first come out to the family saying, I am gay, and the next question is, what is gay? And then you start with a whiteboard and a chalk and you start explaining what is gay, what is lesbian, and then you again come back to the first topic. So I am gay. I mean, it may sound humorous, but again, this strategy doesn't work out. It's better if you maybe from the newspaper or from a film clip, initiate the topic first, let people's reactions vent out. Let it also gives you a window to their mind. You know what they are thinking about it. So even as an ally, if you want to introduce yourself, let's what maybe you can open the Netflix and watch a queer themed movie together. Choose the movie judiciously so that it does have a good ending for the first exposure, and then maybe you will see a lot of reaction among people. Now, you will actually require time to address these questions, these queries, these reactions, and accordingly, you will prepare your next step as to whether to watch another movie together, or it's the right time to actually tell them that such and such friend of mine is gay or lesbian or is queer, and I support the issues. Also, understand that people in general mm, tend to support issues which apparently seem moral and logical as long as it does not affect their core family. So that is also another very selfish thing that you find in families. So it's like, yes, I support gay rights and I support that my son also supports gay rights as long as my son is not gay. So there are different levels of support, So, and also homophobia, therefore, as time passes, as law changes, phobia also transforms and metamorphoses. So maybe 20 years back, the kind of phobia you will see, people scorning people openly, calling them names, that has metamorphosed, that has changed its outer appearance. Now that phobia is more in the form of, okay, you are gay, that's so nice, and the person never speaks to you again. So it changes. People tend to become more socially acceptable by being politically correct. That does not necessarily mean that their mindset has changed. Another thing that I often find interesting to say as an activist is, regarding any socio-political, religious, cultural ideology, it is impossible that everyone will support you. Also, accept that fact. So, if you say something that is challenging, you will have haters. So, you cannot expect the whole world to support you. When I say something or I write something on Facebook, I am not writing or posting expecting that 100% of the reactions will be affirmative. There will be angry reactions, there will be hate reactions. So that is how it works. I mean, as long as there are people who support me around me, as long as I feel safe and included in them, there will be some outer disturbances, and I will face that. I mean, this is also the kind of positive attitude that people who are in marginalized communities have to understand, probably.
I'm so glad you brought up these angles. I think these are the things that we wanted to talk about, particularly when you said that, we are an ally as long as it doesn't affect our core families. And so it is so like we have come across many people, and probably sometimes I think this is a question we need to ask, like, what is that being an ally? Is it just supporting, or just superficially supporting, or really feeling and supporting? Or to the extent that tomorrow if my son comes and tells me that, okay, I am gay and I would like to marry another man, where how will I feel about that and how will I respond to that? And probably that part is something people, it's still that us and they part is there. It is a very interestingly, someone told me that why is there an ally for the LGBTQI community? We don't have an ally for any other marginalized community, right? Why is it like we don't have an ally for the disabled community, or we don't have an ally for so and so community? Why an ally here? Aren't we creating a divide here by saying you need an ally, as if it's a them and we are going as rescuers and supporters to support them? While a lot of things we know why, and you beautifully explain why allyship has developed, I think that made me think also that really is it like, where are we, and how, are we also internalizing some kind of us and them thing, some kind of power play? What exactly is happening in this entire paradigm of allyship, and is it as uniform? Like when I call an ally, is the landscape as uniform as we think, or is it undulated and um, maybe more diverse than we think it is?
Of course, Dr. Ananya. And also, this actually reminds me of a very interesting thing. I often speak about is that this you will see in terms of religious minorities, in cultural minorities as well, that when you support someone, you will see you will be surrounded by some number of people who will support you for being the kind of minority that you are. I am not Islamophobic. I support your religious rights because you are a good Muslim. Now, so you define what is meant by a good Muslim and a bad Muslim. And as long as I subscribe to your definition of being a good Muslim, you support me. This I have faced in my own life. There are many friends in my earlier part of life. Of course, we are not in good touch now. Who used to say that, Tirthankar, we support you because you are not like other gay people. I said, what does that even mean? So, of course, every person is different. Everyone is unique. So I am not definitely like any other person, and any other person is also not like me. And then I started understanding what they really meant by this. So they supported me because in the beginning part of my career, or in the beginning part of my journey as an activist, of course I was not very powerful, I was not very bold. I will not say something that will go against the traditional cis-het sentiments, and therefore I was adorable. I was not a person maybe who is trans identified, and therefore I will not wear a drag makeup, and therefore I am acceptable. So the acceptability factors were again aligned to the requirements and the perceptions of the cis-het population. So I think this kind of a support is a more dangerous support. And when we are also choosing allies, we have to sometimes understand what they understand by their own allyship. So there are people who might support you, actually support you wholeheartedly, and also make homophobic and transphobic comments, thinking that this will not affect you because they are protecting you as a person. So this person has failed to dissociate the personal from the professional or political. That part is a very dangerous part. This support is not a support. It's a support that you alone as a privilege is getting at the cost of other people being scorned at and bullied. So we should be also very wary of this kind of pseudo allies, if I might call them.
Absolutely, absolutely. And
I think a
since we're
message that comes across very strongly that Sir is also saying is, I think the cause is greater than an individual, right? That how he's
Yes,
saying
of course.
about,
That is what I was trying to
moving
say.
away from the individual and dissociating from the personal.
Yes.
absolutely. And I think media and government also plays a very important role. There are, when you were giving the just talking about authorities and how an organization can make you feel it. Just like last year I was in Germany and Netherlands in the Pride month, and then I saw all the zebra crossings. They're all colored in pride colors. And so whenever, wherever you're walking, you are having this sense that, you are, it's an inclusive space, and that gave you a sense of freedom, and it just had that spirit all across. So that was the government making a, like, it's saying, taking a stance. And media, I just want to share this, like, one of my clients came about saying something about their 5-year-old daughter, and they were watching Modern Family. And in Modern Family, if you have watched it, there are different types of couple. There is an elderly person who had married a young person. There is a very typical heterosexual couple, and there is a homosexual couple as well. So the 5-year-old girl is saying that, why is always like Cinderella, there's a prince who is coming, why doesn't Snow White come to Cinderella? Why do you not give us these stories? And the parents were baffled, like, how do we respond to this? And they were thinking that if we now say that it is okay, will that shape their orientation? Is it okay for them to watch things like these on TV, which will shape their orientation? So apparently, quote unquote, these parents are allies. That is how they come across, but they're very concerned about the kind of exposure they're giving, which will again probably shape the orientation of their 5-year-old child because of the exposure.
Yes, a common manifestation of this, Ananya, you will see that when maybe a boy comes up to their family and says that I like particular girl, they may have a number of questions regarding the girl, but they will never question their sexuality. But if that same boy comes up saying that they erotically or romantically like a boy, the first question will not be about the other boy. The first question will be, are you sure? Even if they are very supportive. So Yeah, they can always double check and give them a chance to redecide their sexual orientation. But then why not give this chance to people who are also claiming to be heterosexual? So that is an
Right,
injustice to heterosexual people, I think.
right, right, right. So the other thing, I think you have worked extensively, right, in with colleges, with school. Like right now, I think you are doing a lot of work. So, how do you think organizations, like you already mentioned some of the things, but what has been your experience like in terms of the current uh, situation in India in terms of organizations like schools, colleges? Are things changing? Are people becoming more inclusive? Are they open to making policy changes in their uh, organization to be more affirmative?
Yes, a lot is actually happening. So, very recently, I also attended a symposium in Delhi where a large number of queer ambassadors shared their annual experiences of what they did in their own colleges. They were all students from health universities and medical colleges. So, in some places, like in the southern part of India, there has been a massive change. I mean, colleges have included gender diverse pronouns in their admission forms, have created separate words for people who do not identify as male or female, and uh, teachers have been invited to very regular interval seminars where the students have been disseminating information on queer affirmative therapy, and the superintendent of the college has been actively supporting this and promoting this. We have also had instances where the colleges are rigid. So, as usual, they had to go through the window of sexual health and HIV to approach issues on sexuality, but they were in some way able to execute some of the deliverables. So things are changing. In Kolkata itself, there are about 3 or 4 medical colleges where students have formed queer allies and also queer inclusive support groups. But we don't really have institutional support as of now. Uh, Also, I personally feel the way health education is conceptualized and executed in India, it is not only largely heteronormative, it is also largely disease centric and desexualized. The sexualization happens only with regard to heterosexual reproduction. So, this we have seen or witnessed in all parts of the medical education and practice. So, I that is why my stress in working has always been on the curriculum part, because say in the first year when students are learning medical physiology, they read essentially a heterosexual physiology, and even in the heterosexual physiology, it's a non-pleasure centric physiology when it comes to the sexual system. They only talk about fertilization, implantation, and delivery of the child. So that's all done. So the problem with this approach is, even at a later age, when you introduce to them the concepts of being queer, they already have imprinted in their mind that the physiological approach, the medical approach towards physiology is reproduction centric. And so they don't find any meaning to adding the queer spectrum to the medical studies. Another big problem that we find in execution of our knowledge is, so I'll just give an example to you. When girl comes with issues of, say, polycystic ovarian syndrome, even without asking the girl, the chief approach of the gynecologist is to restore the fertility of the girl. But maybe the problem that the girl has come up with is because of pain in the abdomen or maybe with cosmetic issues. So again, we are giving more importance to the perceived notion that the female body is for reproduction alone. And when these are taught actively and passively throughout the course of 5 to 6 years in a medical institution, we become, in a way, conditioned to the heteronormativeness of our learning. And unlearning that, understanding that we are not only catering to heterosexual individuals medically or therapeutically, is it does become very difficult.
Right. So, are there any common myths that you come across when you, like, as you said, that being an ally starts with knowledge, awareness, knowledge, being well read. So, do you come across people who come with very common myths and then you have to bust those myths for them or unlearn and that unlearning relearning process? What is your typical experience like?
Yeah, I mean, it comes at various levels. I mean, you can actually have an kind of an exhibition with the kind of the myths. So the very basic level of the myth that we have is there is nothing called gay. So there is nothing called lesbian. I mean, these are imaginations, and people who usually study in the comparative literature or English department of Jadavpur University become gay. So these are kind of things I have grown up hearing. So then the second level of the myth is yes, there are people who are called gay or lesbian. We don't see them very often, but if you see them, it's better not to talk to them. They're not normal. Okay, these are the standard ones. Then comes the enlightened ones. Like, yes, there are people called gay and lesbian, and we must support them. We must always support the diseased ones because we stand in solidarity with people who are weak, who are diseased, and who have degenerations of their mind. So that is another level of support that you get. Then you get the one step up one where you get people who say that yes, there are people who are gay or lesbian, and they have later read a lot of psychodynamic theories and Freud. So they will now come up with some part of your GI tract and explain where the block is, and then they will start explaining, okay, due to this block in development you have become gay, but I have full support to you. So you, what I'm trying to say is there is a subtle pathologization at the back of the mind, and
Yes.
this pathologization is sometimes used as a justification to abnormalize it, and sometimes used as a justification to sympathize for it. But the problem is that people who are queer neither need to be pathologized nor sympathized at. Uh, this kind of a neutral support is very difficult to get. And I'm not saying that people cannot become neutral supporters. In order to become that, they have to overcome all these biases that they have. So, if you ask me, I think the biggest challenge is the wrong information and the wrong aptitude that they have regarding gender and sexuality in general. So, that is the biggest barrier to overcome in order to become a good ally.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we have almost come to the end of our Q&A session. So from the audience, if you have any question, please feel free to write in your chat box. Revati, do we have any questions yet? Okay, I think we have a
Yes.
few questions.
Could I say that?
Yes. Padmaja, do you have any further question or should we go into the live?
There was just one query I had. We spoke about allyship and the nitty gritties of it, and also the levels of allyship. And we spoke a lot about the unlearning process, right? And individually, what we can also do to be an ally. I was wondering that if it's enough, or when there are newer there are now what we call as social advocacy. Is it always important that we take it up and we go beyond our clinical space as well to go for the pride and work with them closely? And would unlearning be enough? I would ask. And is it important that we also step out of our clinical practice as well to, work with work with them as well, to understand, to, be a part of the process as well.
Well, if this is a question to me, I think what I'll answer is my opinion. And of course, what you are suggesting is a very ideal situation again. You cannot enforce that on someone, but this will be something wonderful to have. It's very similar to saying that if a person is a teacher of science, that person should be well learned in science, that is a necessity, should be a good communicator, that is desirable, but can also be a scientist and a myth buster. Now, that is adorable. In the similar way, if you are a queer affirmative counselor or therapist, it's important that you are affirmative in your practice. It is desirable that you have a sound knowledge of the queer issues, but it is adorable if you really join the movement and extend your support. Yeah, of course.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank
Can
you.
I read the questions out?
Yes, please. So we have a few questions, Dr. Tirthankar. We can take them now, right?
Sure, sure.
So Muskan has asked, Sir, you mentioned that even when one is not an ally but can be a queer affirmative therapist, and there's a risk involved in that, like the Freudian slip you mentioned. So don't you think there's a higher chance of harm than good? Doesn't it go against the ethical principle of beneficence and non-maleficence?
Um, See, I mean, your question is suggestive because you are expecting an answer like yes and no, but I'll give an opinion. Muskan, thank you for the question first. It's a nice question. I think no, there is a risk. The risk is not higher because by higher, if you are comparing with someone who is non-affirmative, I think the risk is much higher. At least here there is a chance that the person might make mistakes but will not actually diagnose a disorder called homosexuality or egotistonicity. So at least that kind of a gross malpractice will not be here. And although we know very well that from the 1973's convention in APA or 1990's convention in the WHO, ICD and DSM has changed, but we also know the ground reality in India. We still get prescriptions where there are man-made, I mean, not just man-made, mind-made categories like sexual perversion disorder. I don't even know what is the code, ICD code for that disorder. So people make up diagnosis like this. At least it will be better. At least if they are professionally trained to be queer affirmative, they at least know their boundaries. And yes, of course, there is a risk that they can make mistakes and cause some degree of harm, lesser harm than an overtly non affirmative therapist, probably. And it's always desirable that the person is an ally so that the mistakes are much less and the intentions are more genuine.
Okay, thank you so much, sir, for answering that. There are two more questions. Giridhar Kanan has asked, I am a medico, sir. Where can I learn more about queer physiology?
Giridhar, this is again a very interesting question. Let me first tell you one very important thing. There is no queer physiology. And if you understand the origin of the word queer socio-politically, queer is a reclaimed word. So what it simply means is, from a literary point of view, the word queer means strange, and that too not in a very positive sense, in a very negative intonation. So in the early times, people who are non-conformative or people who are non-cisgender heterosexual were called queer. That is, they are very strange people. Now, historically, we have seen in many movements, in women's rights movements, in queer movements, words have been reclaimed back into glory. So the word that was used for scorning people are now reclaimed by the same community and they use it with pride. That is how the word queer came. So the word queer is not a biological word. The word queer is a social, political, maybe a political and cultural word. In that sense, from a biological perspective, there is nothing called queer physiology. The best way to queer the medical studies or queer the study of your physiology is to understand that the study of physiology is the study of diversity in human beings. So when you talk about, say, for example, changes during adolescence, you use neutral terminologies like during this time many individuals start realizing their sexual attractions instead of using words like people get attracted to the opposite sex. And we use the word many because you also realize people may be asexual. This inclusive terminologies make a book queer affirmative. So yes, there can be books written on physiology which are queer affirmative and inclusive, but we will not like to categorize physiology into queer and non-queer. We as human beings are one species, and that is what movements are all about. Maybe one day these boxes will go away, but we will also retain individual identities. That is a very ideal state of being that we are looking forward to.
Thank you, sir, for answering that. There are two more questions that have come. Ankita Biswas, ma'am, who is also working at therapy, she has asked, I'm curious to know from you about the current scenario and the difficulty to reach the understanding of heteronormativity, heteronormativity among people beyond the cream of society that is suburbs and villages.
See, to understand, you have to get into that population. So, if you are tending to look into people who are non-privileged, then the survey methodology should also be non-privileged. So you are right. I mean, you cannot expect to learn about the underprivileged people's perception of sexuality by using a Google form, because they don't know how to use a Google form. So in that case, maybe more contact-based, ground-reach outreach working will be more effective. If you are really interested in working on issues like this, I think it will be very interesting if you can get in touch with Theraphill. Uh, I think they will share their email ID with you, and maybe we can introduce you, if you are really interested, to more outreach working NGOs and CBOs who might give you some permission to work with them and understand how they are approaching their own senses of heteronormativity.
Okay, sir. Thank you. There's another question from her. Is allyship also growing to be visible in the not so developed parts of our country where a large population of queer humans belong?
This is a very difficult question, Ankita. Now, if you really ask me, I'll be very open and personal with you regarding this. I really never saw in my life that allyship has anything to do with urban rural distinction. I've seen families way in the rural places where an effeminate boy is accepted as part of the family. I have seen urban families where conversion therapies are done on a girl who is behaving like a man. I have seen farmers, very poor, underprivileged farmers, coming to us because their child is having fever and not because their male assigned child at birth dresses up with a skirt or with a sari. So their chief complaint is the health and not the gender identity. We have also seen highly educated individuals and privileged individuals like engineers and doctors saying that there is nothing called homosexuality. These are just mental illnesses. So there are problems in every sector. Of course, the challenges are hard in the rural areas because the support systems, instant support system is not there. You get some degree of seclusion and privacy in the urban households also. For example, if you close the door of your flat, no one will bother you. Of course, that kind of privacy is not there in the rural areas. So there are challenges of their own sort. But I really don't think it is more of a developing or urban rural problem. It's a problem of education and mindset. And you will get people of every type in every social milieu.
Thank you. The last question is from Manisha Ghosh. Sir, how do we distinguish performative allyship from actual allyship, especially during Pride Month when most organizations are changing their logos to rainbow ones as if to hop onto the bandwagon?
Yeah, I mean, you just uttered what I always feel like. So keep your senses open, look out, you will make out in the right time when the right time comes. I have seen there is one um, cab hiring app, online cab booking app, who changes their color of the cabs, the logo of the cabs, into rainbow flags, making it more difficult to look at the map actually. So anyway, all the roads become rainbow colored. So the conventional Google convention of blue being a very clear road, yellow being a partially a busy road, that everything blends into the rainbow spectrum, and you have absolutely no idea of which road to take. That apart, I have seen such app holding this for the entire month of June, and that time I actually booked a cab there, and the driver was constantly screaming at the hijra individuals who were by the side of the road, saying कि ये झक्के लोग सारे जगह आ गए. So they did not even train their drivers on allyship, on right use of terminologies, but they have changed the color of the app. So yes, of course, I mean, corporate is all up to business. So yeah, that will happen. You will get a large number of rainbow cupcakes this week from different pastry houses, and I mean, that is all. Once June goes away, their allyship will fade into oblivion. That's how it happens.
That is so disheartening, sir. Manisha Ghosh has also said, Sir, lastly, I would like to ask for your opinion on including ally as one of the expansions of the LGBTQIA plus acronym and thereby by extension the community.
That is a wonderful suggestion, of course. I am no one to approve that, but of course, if you start using it that way, I will really adopt that and popularize it. It's a wonderful way of saying that.
Thank you, sir. I would like to ask one question of via me. For me, would be that my so I believe that peers are the biggest supporters of people who are actually queer or are homosexuals, for example. So how can I, as a student and a friend, help myself to become a better ally?
I think the same rules apply. I mean, treat the individual for who they are and extend your allyship to the cause irrespective of who your friends are, which I think is very important. Learn about the issues and become an active spokesperson. Becoming an active spokesperson also means normalizing the issue to such an extent that maybe once in a while, when you post about women rights, you also post on queer rights without actively thinking of which month it is. So it becomes an integral part of your thinking process, your learning philosophies, and your life principles.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. So I think we can then take one last comment from everyone. Any parting comment? Anything that last you would like to say to your audience? Anything, any takeaway message or one thing that
There is no takeaway message that I can give you. I mean, I'm not in a position of doing that. I think the whole idea of pride is to be proud of who you are and also take pride in people being who they are. So as long as we live and let live, live and let love, I think the world will be a much better place. So this philosophy is very simple to hear but very difficult to execute. But I think, and it's also true that even I as a human being may not always be able to do that. I have my own prejudices, I have my own biases, but what is important is to identify that. Maybe someday some friend of mine will point out saying that, see, this what you are saying is not correct. So it's there is nothing to be ashamed of the fact that despite being a queer ally and activist, I have something which is not correct. It's actually to be proud of that I could identify and realize that there is something not so correct about me, and it gives me a chance to change myself. So I think we should be open to our own criticisms, evolve as human beings, and finally let people be who they are without harming other people. I think that's the simplest principle we can follow in life.
that's so beautifully put. Thank you so much for joining us today. Padmaja, do you want to add anything to that?
Um, I think Sir has beautifully, given a lot of insights and certain things that even for us, it's sometimes difficult to kind of navigate through. I think the only message that I'm leaving with is, like Sir said, that the cause is greater than the individual, and I think true allyship, like Sir was talking about, it takes a lot of work, and it's going to be a long-standing work. It doesn't end only with the Pride Month. It's going to continue and keep continuing, and maybe in smaller ways, and sometimes in adding up, it would become like a bigger cause as well. I think in our own individual ways, we can do a lot of things, like Sir has said, educating ourselves, being aware, sometimes even calling out people when they are using certain kind of terms. So these are small individual ways in which we can also contribute.
I also hope today's discussion expanded the domain of allyship for many and also busted certain myths that we were probably carrying. My one thing that resonated with me was what Dr. Tirthankar said, that one day I hope the boxes go away and yet we maintain our individuality. I really hope that that day comes and we live to see that day. And we had tried in our own way to create this and start the process of unlearning. So last year we did have around it was an 8-month long project of unlearning. So if anybody is interested to delve into the process of unlearning, feel free to go to our Instagram page. And we had done a set of unlearning, and we are continuing with this process. I think these kind of conversation help us to look within ourselves more than looking out. I think looking within ourselves and seeing what kind of internalized beliefs we are holding and how we are operating. So we will be having a movie screening by Dr. Tirthankar. Like one of his award-winning movies will be screened, and then we will have a discussion. We will have one more round of question answer session with Dr. Mohan Isaac, and we will also have a reflective session with Maitri Ralde, but this is specifically for therapists to look within and see how it is to be a queer affirmative therapist. All these are very safe, honest places to be in, because we are all trying, like Dr. Tirthankar said, that we are all trying to be allies, and it's a symbiotic process. It's like we help each other and to create that space where the boxes are gone. So, with that, thank you so much for joining us today, for having this very stimulating discussion. And we hope to have such many such discussions. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, even I would like to first thank you for taking some time off from your busy schedule and joining us today. Thank you, honestly, to each one of you for taking such an important topic for today's Q&A. And it is truly because of people like you, people can come out and openly talk about their sexuality, which leads the LGBTQI community to become stronger and more respected. On that
Thank you.
note,
Thank you.
we can end the session.
Thank you. Have a good evening, everyone.